Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. According to our guest today on Pathways, every day there's an inner battle going on between two major parts of our being, the ego and our soul. When we view the world through our ego's lens, life can seem tragic, random, meaningless, and painful. Today's guest offers mindful practices and spiritual tools to shift your perspective and step into your power. Our guest is Sue Frederick, author of the new book, Through a Divine Lens, Practices to Quiet Your Ego and Align with Your Soul. Sue is a spiritual coach, a lifelong intuitive, master numerologist, certified soul regression therapist, and an ordained unity minister. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, on CNN, and in Real Simple, Yoga Journal, Natural Health, and Complete Woman magazines. The author of I See Your Dream Job, I See Your Soulmate, and Bridges to Heaven. She lives in Scottsdale, Arizona. Hello, Sue, and welcome to the Pathway Show.
Hi, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Okay, so let's start with the title of your book. What do you mean by a divine lens?
Well, that book was inspired by a vision I had in 2014. I had been teaching a grief shifting workshop at Kripalu Retreat Center. You probably know about that place
I've
in
been there, yeah.
Massachusetts. Yeah. And I love teaching there. It is a long flight to and forth there. And I got home and I was sick. And so I started running a high fever. And all of my life, I've easily had out of body experiences, especially if I'm sick. If I'm sick, it's almost like I'm just gone from the body for that experience. So one night when I was really sick after that workshop, I left my body and I was held by these divine beings. They may have been angels and guides, and they brought me out to this place where I could see planet Earth from a distance. And if you're watching the YouTube version of this, you can see this graphic behind me that illustrates the vision. The guides said, look at all those dots of light. And there were light beams shooting up all around planet Earth. And as each beam shot up into the sky, it lit another light next to it. And you could watch this light filling the entire globe and filling all the dark places. And the guides were saying, this is how it works. It doesn't matter how tragic things look and seem when you're down in the middle of the events on Earth. In the big picture, the light is always winning and the love is always winning. And they were like, Sue, when you go back to your body, you have to teach and write about these things. And so when I woke up that morning, I was trying to remember like how to put all that into words. So I just got my laptop and started writing. And I remember thinking I was shown this view, almost like I had a divine lens from the soul, and that's how it came to me that we literally have two ways we view life. And one is down in the thick of the story of it on Earth, where we see pain and suffering and tragedy and doom and gloom everywhere, because there is a lot of suffering on Earth. And the other is when we're pulled back to this larger divine lens view that we can all access when we quiet the mind and open the heart.
Wow. Well, that's a great story. And you say that you're a lifelong intuitive. Well, what does that mean?
I was the weird kid growing up who would come to the breakfast table and share a precognitive dream about a car accident on a specific road, a certain person driving a car, etc. And my family would laugh at me. It was the 50s, right? And I would even say what color the truck was. And my father would say, but we don't dream in color, because back in the 50s, that's what the psychologist said, that we didn't dream in color, right? But I was like going, no, it's a dream. It was a green truck. And then later that day, after school, I'd forget about the dream completely. And somebody else, the person in the dream would be driving the car and we'd be headed on that exact road, and a green truck would pull up in front of us and suddenly stop. And I'd be in the back seat yelling, "Stop, it's a green truck, it's my dream." And we would stop right before we hit it. And that was very common, but it was the 50s. And so I was very much told early on by teachers, by parents, by everybody, that's just weird. Like, that's not going to make you any friends, Sue, you know? And so I sort of hid it for a long time, as we do, growing up in this culture that's very left brain centered. But it was always guiding me, and it has always been guiding me all my life.
Wow. But you also say that we all have what you call flawless intuition guidance system.
Yes, we do, including you and everybody. And the thing about it is it's what we call our gut feeling, or our heart is telling us something. And the only obstacle we ever have to being completely in touch with that is our thoughts, our monkey mind, as the Buddhists call it. And in our culture, we're taught to completely trust our thinking, that our brain is the most important part of us. And our culture is so dominated by that idea that logic is king, you know?
Right.
And that's why people are cynical, and that's why they're so locked down in the left brain, fear-based way of thinking. And the ego wants us to live. And so it really puts in front of us constantly, be careful, be afraid, don't take any risk, don't love people, you might be hurt. That's the ego trying to protect us. But the soul, the higher self, the wisdom that we all have is going, hey, you're a divine being like everybody else on earth. You're all evolving as you should. And you came to learn love and compassion and to fulfill your great mission there. So get over yourself and step up and do it.
You know, I wrote a book called Intuitive Intelligence, and it tells the story of some highly illogical decisions I made that really panned out in a very positive way. And you make the point that we have to trust our intuition often sometimes when it seems illogical.
Yeah.
That's kind of hard. That's kind of hard for people to do because you know, like you say, we're in survival, and particularly now, you know, with pandemics and climate change, you know, the whole survival anxiety syndrome is really amped up.
And you can think of it, Paul, as a real tipping point in consciousness where it's just not going to be easy here now. We are at such a tipping point. And if you go back to that vision I had in 2014 of the light, the only way that light can spread around the globe completely is if every dark crevice holding unawakened, unconscious souls comes to life, acts up, so to speak, so that the light can be brought to that. You can't heal it unless it's revealed. You got to reveal it to heal it. And so when we look at this moment in time, people like you and me and your listeners, we are awakened. We have to remember to lean into that sense of the divine process of this and of bringing love and compassion to it rather than fear, because fear is the dark side, the monkey mind. And when we talk about this, you know, eco disaster, well, yes, that's a logical reality, but there's also all sorts of other amazing angelic and divine and intergalactic beings who are always looking out for us, always trying to help us. And I believe there's kind of a pretty intense discussion going on amongst those various councils about what to do with planet Earth. And the more we lean into our love and our compassion and show that we are waking up to the importance of love here on earth, I believe we're helping that tipping point tip to the light.
You know, people are having such a hard time coping, and they're turning to all kinds of, you know, self-medication and addictions, really. And you have some things to say about addictions because, as you write, our ego voice tells us that life is too difficult and physical pleasure is our only relief from suffering in a pointless world. And the very act of pursuing drugs, alcohol, or any addiction is the act of a hungry soul seeking meaning in an empty world. Wow.
And
That's
that's right. I mean, we tend to judge people with addictions and say, oh, they made terrible choices or they ruined their life. I really flip that and say that is a highly evolved, deeply sensitive soul looking for God, looking for a higher perspective, and not being able to believe in anything beyond the physical. So it's really a spiritual crisis. And I'm not talking about religion. I don't believe in dogma and fundamental Christianity and things like that. And I'm a unity minister, so I've studied every spiritual path. But what I can say is once we realize with our heart and soul totally understand that this is physical world is our brief school, that the divine world is our home and our essence, and that there is no death. The veil is practically gone. The veil is so thin right now. And we start living from the awareness that we're always surrounded by divine beings, by guides, by angels, by departed loved ones, trying to help us if we allow them. Suddenly, addiction isn't one person alone in a room seeking something beyond the physical to lift them up, and so going to drugs. Suddenly, that person has a moment of going, I feel the presence of my departed loved one, or I feel an angelic being helping me. I am not alone, and I want to somehow find a way to live with awareness that I'm a divine being and help humanity. That's an awakening that can happen even in the darkest addiction.
so let's say that you're caught up in a negative spiral, the ego is reading alarming headlines, and you start to think thoughts like, oh, geez, it's too late, or there is no hope, or what difference can I make, or all of these kind of, of thoughts. What's the technique for shifting from the ego lens to the divine lens? In other words, for getting in touch with the soul. What is the soul? Where is it? How do I contact it?
Well, think of the soul as being your true essence. It's in you. It's who you are. The body is just a little costume. You can think of it as you were planning this lifetime and you said, what body can I bring to earth that will provide for me the exact learnings and lessons that I need to have on that planet? And so our soul chooses a physicality, but it's just a shell around us. And so when we're feeling lost, we don't have to reach somewhere else for our spiritual self, our soul. It is the essence of who we are, but we have to quiet the mind. The mind is not who we are. And the great Buddhists and Hindus thousands of years ago were teaching those principles and saying, the mind is the monkey and you have to tame it. You have to quiet it to know God. And they were the original teachers of the most beautiful meditation practices, chanting and Sanskrit languages. And I still believe that's probably the easiest way to quiet the mind is repeat Sanskrit chants and mantras like Om, the sound of God. But if that's not your gig, then another very simple way to do it is, I say, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and then you can even lift up your face and say, please, divine beings who guide and love and support us, lift me up above my limited view. Help me see this differently. Show me the grace and love to move through this moment. And your prayer is always answered because that's their job, to help us. They wait for us to request it because they can't interfere. But the moment we request help, we are lifted above our negativity.
That's the what you define in your book as true prayer, which is the request for guidance. And you point out the ego prays for things, the soul prays for wisdom and courage, and the soul's prayers are always answered. That's very, very reassuring. By the way, I'm also an ordained New Thought minister, so
Oh, that's great.
I know we have some things in common here. So now you talk about suffering, quite a bit in the book, and in Buddhism, the first noble truth is life is imbued with suffering, and you can't really avoid that truth, but you can become free from suffering, which I suppose in your system is adopting the soul lens, is basically another way of putting that. But how can we find the opportunities behind suffering? The suffering is
Yeah.
no fun. We just want to avoid it. And
Yeah, but spoken like a five path, Paul, I happen to know your numerology, and five paths are experts at avoiding suffering whenever possible.
oh, really? I wish I was better at it.
Adventure, travel, physical sports, all these things are all part of the five path journey. And often they do lift you above a lot of the pain and suffering. However, what I want to say is, everybody here on earth is here to learn. That's why we come here, to learn and help. And so if we are sleeping through our life, which most of us are when we first get here, we're just listening to what our parents tell us to do and be, what the culture tells us to do and be. That's called sleeping. And then when we hit a painful reinvention, that can be the loss of a loved one, a loss of a career, some other tragedy, health crisis, suddenly we're lifted up now going, wait a minute, who am I really? What is the purpose of my life? And where are my loved ones going when they die? And why am I still here on earth? Those are the questions that when we're in pain, our soul is calling us to seek the answers for. And until you've had a moment of pain, often you don't care about those questions at all. It's more like, hey, what can we do for fun right now? But the more you live on earth, the more you realize this place is not a party. I mean, you can have great friends and wonderful moments, but when we realize the game here is to help, to make a difference from what we've learned, to understand how to walk other people through their pain journey and help them, now we're doing what we came here to do.
You know, I just read an article on eco-anxiety, and and it's pretty, and I'm suffering. I suffer from that, where I worry about, my grandson's future. I worry about the planet, and every day. And this article pointed out we have to accept reality, and one of the realities we have to accept is that every day things are going to get worse, at least for the time being. That's hard to take.
Yeah, but that's the logical mind. And I want you to think about the bigger picture here, that we really don't know how this is going to play out. Our logic mind wants to paint the very logical and practical future, which is complete doom and gloom. But what if this is a moment of consciousness shifting where, if enough of us wake up, we will suddenly have our intergalactic soul agreements with our other beings coming and providing different solutions for us here, our angelic soul beings coming and solving problems in different ways. There is so much more going on than the human story and what the human mind can understand. The ancient cultures, whether it was Native American or Hindus and Buddhists, they all understand that the only truth comes from spirit, comes from the wisdom beyond the physical and beyond the mind. We've lost touch with that completely. And when you hear an article that says the reality is everything will get worse and worse, to me, that completely shuts the door to possibilities that our monkey mind can't even fathom, that are waiting to help us.
You have a lot to say about death and grief and grief work in your book, and you do a lot of healing in that area. And you also, I found the book very interesting because you would have these transcripts of different past life regressions, or different conversations with people on the other side. And you say death can be a great teacher. So you've got like a very positive attitude about everything, but including death. So tell us about what you mean by that.
Well, what I mean by it really is, death was my first wake-up call. I was 29 years old when my beautiful young mountain climbing husband died in my arms of colon cancer. So I know suffering and I know death, and I understand the absolute raw, jagged pain of grief. And my best childhood girlfriend died the next year of leukemia. But their souls came back immediately and told me how it really worked, and that they weren't dead. In fact, they were happier and healthier and freer than ever. showed themselves to me, taught me things in ways that now I know there is no death. The soul lives on, and our spirits of our departed are always trying to come back and show us that and help us. But often we've been dogmatized by religion, and so we think that's evil or bad, and we don't pay attention to it. But what I'd say just quickly about it is death is our greatest teacher because it breaks our heart wide open. And then we start seeking that spiritual truth and hopefully connecting to our departed as a deeper understanding that there is no death.
Yeah, when you think about what religion has done to people's consciousness, and I'm talking about ideological religions, not New Thought and not Buddhism or Taoism, but where religions teach children to believe in a God who could condemn you to eternal torture if you die at the wrong time after you've done some naughty thing. That to me is psychic terrorism. And it's like, I often joke to my friends and say, God is having an identity crisis. He can't decide whether he's the God the judge or the God of love. And
Well,
really the
you and I,
God of judge seems much more real. This fear of punishment and shame and guilt and all that stuff that we're imbued with from a young age.
it's so tragic, Paul, and you and I are both New Thought ministers. So we've both had the blessing of going and studying. For example, I got to study the real history of Christianity and the real original Bible transcripts in the Aramaic. What did Jesus really say? Well, guess what? He talked about reincarnation. And guess what? He gave us a new commandment: love one another. And that whole section in Matthew 5 of the Beatitudes is Jesus's new law of commandments that he gave while he was here on earth. And yet, if you talk to any fundamentalist Christian today, that's not at all what they think. They think the most important thing Jesus said was, you have to be saved through me. Jesus never said that. I mean, don't even get me started, but all the crazy thinking that Christian teachers and leaders have created and dogmatized their pure-hearted followers, that to me is one of the biggest crimes in God's name. And it's the biggest crime on earth these days. It fills people with loathing and fear, self-loathing. And that's awful and not true.
Exactly. And self-judgment. And so fear of death, fear of judgment, it's crazy. So we're running out of time here, but I wonder if you might want to say a few words about relationships and the role of relationships in the awakening process.
Well, we love to think that Hollywood story that we're here to make each other happy and, and live romantically happy forever. Everything's a soul agreement here, and that's why I love numerology, because it helps you really just figure out what those soul agreements are, especially the ones that are hurting you, and understand how to work with them better. Imagine if people really understood when they got married or fell in love, oh, here comes one of my great teachers. There'll be a lot of learning and a lot of growth. And it's not about living happily ever after. It's about growing happily ever after together, hopefully, and acknowledging that you're both on a journey of learning together. And that's your agreement. So we get that totally wrong down here. And the moment we hit a growth point, we want to bail from the relationship.
Right.
But what we can also do moving forward with people we disagree with politically, which has been the greatest discord probably ever on this planet, is that it's a time for us of learning to no longer live in our heads and our beliefs. We're not going to convince anybody of anything anymore. I think we've learned that. Now what we have to do, we're being tasked to live from the heart, to see beyond a person's words and beliefs and ideas and bring them to the heart and connect that way, heart to heart, soul to soul. Hey, I see you as a soul on a journey. I know you're doing the best you can, just like everyone here. And I bless you and love you on your way. And so it is.
Beautiful. Well, we've got one more minute. Why don't we close with by asking you for some advice for our listening audience? I mean, other than obviously buying and reading your book, which I'm going to say after you're done, but give us a last word of advice.
Everybody listening, please remember that you're not alone, that you are deeply loved, that you are a divine being who came here on purpose. If your pain right now is intense, call out for guidance, call out for help, call out to the highest realm to relieve you of some of your suffering, and trust that it will be there to lift you up and quiet those fear-based thoughts. And you will feel so much better, and you'll recognize your divinity. And so it is.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sue. Thank you so much. There's so much more we could explore. The book is just chock full of wisdom and inspiration. And I just want to thank you for writing it, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
Now, I want to be sure to tell our listeners about your website, which is SueFrederick.com. That's Sue Frederick, all one word, FREDERICK.com. And for those who may have tuned into Pathways late today, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, author of Intuitive Intelligence, which shares the theme of Pathways, which is personal and cultural evolution. Now, don't worry, you can play or share this interview whenever you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today, we've been visiting with Sue Frederick, author of Through a Divine Lens, Practices to Quiet Your Ego and Align with Your Soul. I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into Pathways, which is broadcast and streamed on the internet at www.kboo.fm every Sunday morning by Donald Altman or myself at 8:30 USA Pacific Time. And even better, podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com. That's spelled DIVI nation.com, as well as via iTunes, Paulo's YouTube channel, and other free podcast servers. This is Paul O'Brien reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and podcasts. And thanks again to Sue Frederick and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.